Welcome to this recorded session of presentations from start to finish. We are going to be kind of going through this in 3 stages, starting off with planning, what you need to think about before you even get started, the design and aesthetics aspects to actually assembling your presentation, and then finally best practices for preparing to present. This is kind of getting into some practice, but a lot of just theory and best practices. This is not a tutorial for how to use PowerPoint or other tools. If you do need any help with that, you're welcome to contact the librarians, and we are quite happy to work with you as needed one-on-one if you are having any difficulties with your presentation software, but just not what we're covering today. So starting off, planning. You have a presentation that you know you have to do. What should you start thinking about first to get ready for it? So, as you begin, you always want to keep in mind what is the point of your presentation. Just as when you are writing an essay, you try to have that thesis statement, that one sentence that encapsulates what your argument and topic is for that paper. You want to have that kind of in mind for your presentation. You won't necessarily have that as, a thesis sentence in your presentation, but something that you want to be conscious of and make sure everything that you're including in your presentation reinforces that and circles back to that you're not getting distracted or off track or too tangential. In practical terms, a very good rule of thumb to get started with is 1 slide for every minute of presentation that you have to fill with time. So if you have a 10-minute presentation, start off by putting yourself 10 blank slides, or have a list if you're just writing out what you need to cover where. This does not include non-content slides like your title page, or your works cited, your citations at the end. It's your actual content, but that will give you a starting point to help you figure out how to break down your big topic idea into those smaller pieces. You also want to kind of balance out how much time you spend designing the look of your presentation versus actually creating the content for it. And I say balance because you definitely don't want to spend too much time fiddling with your presentation tool over actually developing the content for it. Anecdote from my personal past, I remember trying out Prezi for the first time for a presentation in school, and it probably took me and my partner 3 times as long to put that together because we were learning a new tool while trying to just put our presentation together. It takes time to do that. So you don't want to end up giving short shrift to the actual content, letting your tool get in the way of it. But as we're going to get into, you also don't want to be completely plain either. So you want to kind of check, touch base on this and then lean back into that just to kind of make sure you're on progress. And I say this because you could easily put together a very plain, simple presentation, then try to add the aesthetics afterwards, and then discover that everything you had previously carefully arranged and formatted now looks wrong. As in this example, our font color for the heading changed and it shrank. It doesn't look very good as a title anymore, a little bitty on there. Some of our content were with our on-slide citations, not really readable on this one. It's needs to be reformatted over here, or the background of this simple image now overlaps with part of the slide title space, as does some of our content. It looked fine when it was plain, then we tried adding that and now it looks weird. So you do want to take advantage of themes and layouts. Don't get distracted by them, and also keep in mind that some of them are going to be more of a intrusive presence on your slide than otherwise. So, nice little segue into design, talking about those aesthetics and some best practices for what this should look like, what this can look like. So first off, there are no style guides to follow the way you do for an essay. So MLA, APA, they have all those rules about size 12, Times New Roman, double spacing. None of that applies to your PowerPoint. They don't care. They explicitly don't care. And that's because, that's just a manuscript. And PowerPoint presentations, any kind of presentation, is a lot more about the aesthetics. It's a completely different way of presenting information. Think of it kind of like the movie version compared to the book, where there's a lot of translation that happens in there. And what works in a book doesn't work in a movie. What works in a paper is not what's best for a presentation that's trying to be more visual. Now, that said, if you do have a MLA citation or MLA presentation, so that doesn't mean anything about your fonts and layout, but it does mean that you will have citations that follow MLA style. Just as when you're writing a paper, it is still important and valuable to cite your sources, provide your evidence, because that's not only showing and giving credit for your information, protecting you from plagiarism. Just as in your paper, it's also adding authority to your claims. So even if it's, just because this is something different, you still need to have that content provided. And that's something that we see students miss out on a lot, is not doing the citations just because it's a presentation. So again, we've got a little bit of flexibility. There is no MLA or whatever PowerPoint. But for instance, when we have our bullet points, you can still include that basic parenthetical citation, or depending on what you need for the layout of your slides, what's going to look better. Again, aesthetics. You can even just kind of squeeze it into the bottom corner of the slide somewhere. So long as it's clear what information is coming from where, that so long as that's represented, you're doing okay. So be sure to include those. Include the full citations at the very end of the presentation as a works cited. But other than that, you've got a lot of options. Now, this kind of gets into what I was alluding to earlier with balancing out content versus design. The way we present information does impact the way we react to it. So even though the actual substance of whatever it is you're saying is important, don't let yourself slip into the trap of, okay, it's just black text on a white slide and there's nothing else going on for it, because that's boring. There's a reason why magazines and websites do interesting layouts, because it makes it more interesting. And as well, it can even affect how well people understand information. If you can describe something in text, it could be better to have a picture instead. A picture's worth 1,000 words, or a chart can represent things a lot better, and there's a whole field of visual communications behind that. That's why we get infographics published, because the way we see things affects the way we react to it. Even colors. People react to red kind of differently than they do blue. So we do want to keep that in mind. There's kind of a full spectrum of slides designs, from the overly wordy to the maybe overly styled that don't quite take into account readability and functionality of it, or being too cluttered, trying to do too much in one place, losing track of what's going to be impactful. So we want to try to avoid some of these worst practices with our best practices. So first off, you want to have minimal text. This is another really, really common misstep in presentations. This is not take your paper, copy, paste chunks of it broken apart onto slides. You need to be processing it and digesting it. Again, it's like a movie adaptation of a book. There's a lot that we leave behind because we have other ways of communicating it, either again through visuals, through colors, through the things that you are saying. It doesn't have to be on your slide, and in fact, it is recommended for there to be less text on your slide to force people's attention back onto you, the speaker. You can see I'm employing that strategy right now with this presentation. I've got minimal text on my slide, enough that you can see it. It does reinforce what I am saying textually, but I'm adding more to it with my words. For fonts, we want a minimum of 28-point fonts. Depends on the font, but usually about 28 to 32. And this is a little bit more important if you are presenting face-to-face in a room, because you want people in the back able to still read everything. Presenting virtually, the screen's right there, doesn't matter quite as much, but it is still a good practice because you physically cannot put a wall of text on your slide if it's 30 points. It will not fit. It's only when you start shrinking things that you can get huge amounts of text on there, which we want to avoid. So big text, and again, fewer words. Keep it bullet pointed. I also keep an eye on your font. Some fonts are cutesier than others. Some are called like display fonts, and those are really meant just to be like headlines, little bits of accent text. And you could do that for the titles of your slides, but for the real content, you want to keep it either just a plain font, very readable, nothing too thin, nothing too bold, keeping in mind that readability. You also want to have a consistent color palette. If you're using a pre-made theme, a-okay. And not getting too deep in the weeds on this because there is a lot of information out there about colors and color schemes that I could say lots and lots about. Just know that don't try to go too crazy on colors as well. Keep things readable, keep things consistent. Again, if you use those pre-made themes, that's okay. If you're building your own from scratch, keep that in mind. And there's resources out there like Color Lovers that will provide you with pre-made palettes that can help you pick the right colors together. Kind of a standard rule of thumb, though, I could say to avoid is the bright blue on bright red or vice versa. Those colors just do not work together. They do weird things to people's eyes. So not so much this, but a darker blue, it's okay. A lighter blue, it's okay. But that bright blue in the same family of bright red, I'm going to explicitly say avoid that one. We also want to keep in mind contrast as well as consistency. So on the left, I have a design that's very consistent in its colors. We've got dark reds, we've got black and gray, kind of a gothy layout, I guess. But this top one is harder to read because we've got this dark red on a dark background, black on a dark gray. It just doesn't show up very well. In the bottom version, we've bolded the text a little bit, added this lighter gray solid box on top of the theme, so that's got that greater contrast. Red, kind of hard to read for a skinny font, so I just switched that into black. I worked in a little bit more red by adding a call out bubble on there if I want to keep that color palette going. Or of course, if I were including an image, that could work. On the right, same kind of principles, just added 5 extra colors basically. Yellow is also not a very readable color. We don't want too many colors on one slide. Generally speaking, there's always exceptions, but generally speaking, we don't want 5 different colors going on at once. If you do use images, keep in mind too that you want to make sure your text is readable on top of them. So this top image, parts of this text are readable, other parts are kind of less so, and then with a darker color just does not show up at all. So you want to consider maybe putting, again, some translucent background. So that's just a square with the transparency turned down so that the picture still bleeds through, but my text is still readable. Maybe I just wouldn't have text at all on that slide. Maybe I just need the image and I'm going to talk about whatever that text needs to be. And same deal on the right, we want to make sure text doesn't overlap with parts of the image that make it hard to read. So just be really aware of how your content fits together. And also, you can be somewhat creative. Keep in mind, like playing with scale can be an interesting way of adding that visual content to your slides. It doesn't just need to be text and image. We're sitting side by side. So here we've got one whole photo scaled up to be the whole background. On the other with the jellyfish, it's the same graphic, just scaled up to fill up the entire slide. We can't see the entire jellyfish anymore, but it does create some visual interest that way when it bleeds off the edges and we can't quite see all of it. So there's more that could be said about the aesthetics of the design, but those are kind of the big principles to keep in mind. So you've gone through, you figured out, you have all your research, you have your ideas, you've been putting together your slides, and you're pretty sure you're basically done with your slide deck, as it is called. So now you need to actually get ready. And for that, I'm going to lean into that old joke. Hey, cab driver, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? And the answer is practice, practice, practice. There is no substitute for that. The only way to do the best presentation that you can is to rehearse it multiple times. It is time consuming. It does mean that, you can't be finishing your presentation at 2 a.m. because then you still have like at least another couple hours of rehearsal to do. You can do an okay presentation winging it. Some people are more naturally gifted at that than others. But I promise you that professional speakers who are really doing a good job with it are and have been practicing what it is they're going to say. They are not winging it. For example, TED Talks are very famous for not just the impactful ideas they present, but the way those ideas are presented. The speakers are very polished. They have a good flow between their slides and the attention that they bring on themselves as they're talking, and they get coached out the wazoo before they are on that stage getting recorded and doing the live TED Talk. Like, there are actual TED coaches who are watching them practice and giving them that critical feedback to get them where they need to be. So, first off, make yourself some note cards to help you remember what it is you need to say. This could be physical index cards, is the traditional classic. It could be an app on your phone. It could even just be a printout of your slides with some notes added onto it. But something just to help you jog your memory about what you want to talk about on each slide. In theory, your presentation should help you do that, because it should be that kind of note level prompt. But especially the first time you're tackling a presentation, things very easily slip your mind. Especially if you are winging it, you're a little bit nervous in that situation, it is super easy for things to slip your mind. And then you realize that later, oh no, it didn't address that whole thing. Which becomes important, like job interviews where you don't get a do-over, and maybe that's something you forgot to mention is something you really wanted to say that would help sell you or your ideas that you're pitching. So going through that practice helps you make sure you are mentioning everything that you want to mention. You might think of something belatedly, and that's your cue to scribble it down so that the next time you practice, you do remember to say it, just to cover all your bases. And then once you do that, you want to get some feedback. That could be from friends or family, someone to actually be your stand-in audience, listening to you rehearse before you go to them, or maybe if you just don't have anyone who has the time to give you, you can record yourself with your laptop webcam, your phone camera. It's a really good idea to record not just the audio, but also the visual, so that you can see, are you making eye contact? Are you maybe like scratching your head a lot and you don't realize it? Along with recognizing those verbal tics. You won't realize how many times you say until you are forced to listen to yourself. I promise, based on the true story. There's also a neat tool available to you. Available in Office 365, which of course you have free access to as a Lone Star student. And normally we do recommend doing the download installed version of all those apps. But this Rehearse with Coach feature is actually something not available in the installed version of PowerPoint. But if you go into portal.office.com or go through my Lone Star, get into that Office 365 browser-based version of PowerPoint, get your slides in there or a version of your slides that you can work with. And under Slideshow, there is a Rehearse with Coach, and it's a artificial intelligence tool that will listen to you present, and it'll give you feedback once you're done, letting you know, oh, you talked too fast, you talked too slow, you got a lot of pause, in there that you need to work with. So again, it's just a kind of AI computer. It can miss things, but it does a decent job. So that's another way of getting some feedback about how you're doing your presentations. And that's a neat little tool to play with. Okay. So to kind of wrap up and to reiterate a few basic things, biggest takeaways: 1 slide per minute as you're planning, and that can change depending on how you decide to craft your presentation, but that's a starting point. Less text, more images. Cite your sources, give credit to your sources, both at the end and on the slides. Make sure everything is readable and legible, that the colors and the thickness of the lines of your fonts balance each other out and practice, 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 practice. If you have questions, you are welcome to come up to the library or otherwise contact the librarians. The Writing Lab is another resource. As I always say about them, if it's more words than numbers, they can help you out. That is true with PowerPoints as well. As I mentioned, if you're struggling with making the thing do what you need it to do, we can also usually assist with that. Okay. Thank you so much for your time, and happy presenting.